A low, mournful wind swept across the wild moors, rattling the bare branches that clawed at the windows of Ashcombe Hall. Inside, candlelight flickered across ancient portraits and velvet drapes, casting elongated shadows that danced along the panelled walls. In the great library, Julian Sinclair, Earl of Winthrop, stood alone before the cold hearth. The fire had long since died, yet he made no move to revive it. The weight of silence pressed upon him, thick as the shroud of mist that blanketed the estate beyond. Julian's gaze lingered on a letter in his hand, a missive from a distant cousin, laced with thinly veiled inquiries and the ever-present undertone of accusation. He crumpled it, jaw clenched. The whispers never ceased, that he had driven his brother to ruin, that the stain upon the Sinclair name would never be washed clean. Even his own reflection, caught in the glass of a rain-streaked window, seemed to judge him. Outside, the staff moved in hushed routines. Hodge, the housekeeper, paused at the library door, listening to the Earl's footsteps echo in the gloom. "He has not eaten," she murmured to the footman. "Not since yesterday." "He won't come down for supper, not tonight," came the reply. "Not with the day it is." They drifted away, their words hanging in the air, part of the tapestry of rumor that wrapped itself around Ashcombe Hall. The Earl's solitude was a fortress, but the stones were crumbling. Far to the south, the rain lashed the bustling streets of London. In a cramped drawing room thick with the scent of lavender sachets and the rustle of taffeta, Clara Marchant stared down at the blank pages of her journal. Inspiration, once her constant companion, had deserted her. Her mother, Lady Marchant, paced behind her, sharp eyes fixed on her daughter's slumped shoulders. "Clara, Lord Everley is a respectable man. He has expressed his intentions most properly," Lady Marchant intoned, hands folded like the wings of a caged bird. "He is dreadfully dull, Mamma," Clara replied, voice edged with desperation. "He has never even read a novel." "That is hardly a requirement for marriage," Lady Marchant sniffed. "You are 25. You must think of your future." Clara closed her journal, fingers trembling. "I would rather write stories than live one I cannot bear." The parlor door creaked open, and Mr. Harrow, her publisher, was announced. He bowed, his quick eyes alight with intrigue. "Miss Marchant, might I suggest a new subject for your pen? There is talk of a certain earl sequestered in the wilds of Devonshire. A tragic figure, they say. Scandal, mystery, perhaps even madness." Clara's heart stirred. "The Earl of Winthrop?" "Precisely. His late brother's death has set all tongues wagging. If you were to uncover the truth, why, it would make a tale to set London ablaze." Lady Marchant paled. "You will not go gallivanting after some broken nobleman, Clara." But Clara's resolve had hardened. "I must, Mamma, for my work and for myself." The village of Ashcombe, a scattering of stone cottages and crooked lanes, bustled with anticipation. Lanterns bobbed in the dusk as townsfolk flocked to the annual masquerade ball, their laughter rising above the plaintive cry of the wind. Clara, face masked with delicate gold filigree, stepped from her hired carriage, breath catching at the sight of the festooned square. Inside the old assembly hall, music swirled and dancers spun in a kaleidoscope of color. Clara's pulse quickened, each step drawing her deeper into the throng. She searched every masked face, hoping for a glimpse of the infamous Earl. Instead, she found only hints: a flash of dark hair, a solitary figure slipping through a side door, a whispered name. In a corner, two village ladies exchanged gossip. "They say he will not dance, not even tonight," one sighed. "Haunted, poor soul," the other replied. "But his library, oh, the treasures it holds." Books from every corner of the globe. Clara's ears pricked. A grand library, hidden from the world. Her decision was made in a heartbeat. As midnight approached, she drifted outside, the night air crisp with secrets. Somewhere beyond the rolling moor, Ashcombe Hall awaited, along with the Earl, his sorrow, and perhaps the story that would change both their lives. With her heart pounding and resolve steeled, Clara slipped away into the shadows, determined to find the truth and the man behind the legend. A brittle morning sun strained through the clouds as Clara Marchant approached the gates of Ashcombe Hall, her heart hammering beneath her traveling cloak. The carriage rattled away down the rutted drive, leaving her alone before the manor's brooding facade. Ivy crawled up the stone, and the windows glimmered with secrets. Clara forced herself forward, boots crunching over gravel, the cool air tinged with the scent of peat and distant rain. She pressed the bell, its peal echoing into the stillness. A narrow-eyed butler answered, his manner brisk, his coat immaculate. "Miss Marchant, I presume. Mrs. Hodge awaits you in the morning room." Clara nodded, summoning a polite smile. "Thank you. I'm most grateful for the Earl's hospitality." She clutched her satchel, which held only a notebook and her trembling resolve. Inside, the manor exhaled a hush, broken only by the ticking of a distant clock. Mrs. Hodge, the housekeeper, materialized from a shadowed corridor. "You are here to learn of our local history, Miss Marchant." The woman's eyes narrowed with suspicion and a trace of hope. Visitors, however rare, brought a sense of purpose to the faded grandeur of Ashcombe Hall. "Indeed, my publisher is eager for a chronicle of Devon's great houses," Clara replied, her voice bright with practiced cheer. "And I have heard Ashcombe's tales are especially fascinating." Mrs. Hodge's expression softened, pride warring with caution. "There are stories aplenty, if one knows where to look." She led Clara down a broad corridor lined with ancestral portraits. "The Earl is not to be disturbed," she warned, "but I shall show you the chapel and the east wing. The library is off limits." Clara bowed her head. "Of course, Mrs. Hodge," but her pulse thrummed with anticipation. The library, the very heart of Ashcombe's legend, was the reason she had come. Mrs. Hodge chattered about the stained glass in the chapel and the tapestries in the long gallery, her attention briefly diverted by the arrival of a delivery from the village. Sensing opportunity, Clara slipped away, her steps muffled on the thick runner. She navigated labyrinthine halls, guided by the faint scent of old leather and ink. A heavy door at the corridor's end beckoned. Clara pressed the latch and entered, breath catching as she beheld the library. It soared upwards, 2 stories of dark oak and gilded railing, every wall crowded with books. Light streamed through a rose window, painting motes of dust in jewel tones. A great marble fireplace dominated the far wall, flanked by busts of ancient poets and philosophers. She turned slowly, awestruck by the magnitude of knowledge and memory pressed between those bindings. She ran her fingers reverently along a row of spines: Milton, Voltaire, Wollstonecraft. "He has everything," she whispered, half to herself. Lost in wonder, Clara barely registered the door swinging open behind her, until she heard a low, cold voice. "Who granted you leave to trespass in my library?" Clara spun, startled. Julian Sinclair stood framed in the doorway, his dark eyes burning with indignation. In the daylight, he seemed even more formidable, tall, severe, the lines of grief etched deeply into his face. The room seemed to contract around him. I apologize, my lord. I could not resist," Clara stammered, but quickly rallied. "Such a collection is a rare privilege." "You must forgive my curiosity." His gaze sharpened. "Curiosity is no excuse for intrusion. The library is private. I must ask you to leave at once." Clara's chin lifted. "Is knowledge to be hoarded, then? Like coins in a miser's chest? Surely, my lord, books are meant to be read and ideas to be shared." Julian's eyes narrowed. "I have no interest in debating philosophy with strangers who invade my home. And yet, you have assembled the finest minds in Europe on your shelves. Shall their voices be silenced because you prefer solitude?" She stepped closer, emboldened by the force of her convictions. "Or is it solitude you seek, or simply the comfort of walls?" A muscle ticked in his jaw. "You know nothing of my reasons, miss." "Marchant, Clara Marchant. I am a writer." She met his gaze, her own steady and bright. "And I believe stories' truths are what keep us from being lost." Julian's anger faltered, replaced by an uneasy curiosity. He looked her over, noting the ink stains on her fingers, the fierce intelligence in her eyes. "A writer? And what sort of tales do you seek to tell?" "Not tales," she replied softly. "Lives, the sorrows and joys that make us who we are, even those shrouded in rumor and shadow." He was silent for a long moment, the air taut between them. Then, with a flick of his hand, he gestured toward the door. "Your audacity is impressive, Miss Marchant. But Ashcombe is not a subject for idle entertainment. You will find no inspiration here." His tone softened despite himself. Go, before I forget my manners entirely. Clara hesitated, searching his face for a crack in the armor. Thank you for allowing me a glimpse, however brief. If ever you wish to discuss Milton or solitude, I would be honored. He did not answer, and so she slipped from the library, pulse racing. In the corridor, Miss Hodge intercepted her, flustered but none the wiser. You must be famished, Miss Marchant. The village inn is quite comfortable. Clara murmured her thanks, accepting the hasty dismissal. As she departed, she glanced back at the manor, its silhouette stark against the waning afternoon light. Ashcombe Hall grew still once more. Alone in his library, Julian stood where Clara had left him, her words echoing in the vaulted hush. He stared at the shelf she had touched, tracing the outline of a volume she had set straight. A spark of something annoyance, intrigue, longing twisted in his chest. At the modest inn, Clara scribbled furiously by candlelight, every detail of her encounter fresh in her mind. He is not what the rumors claim, she wrote. There is grief, yes, but also fire. I must learn what keeps him prisoner within those walls. Beyond her window, Ashcombe's moorland pressed close, thick with secrets. Clara's resolve only strengthened. The truth of the Earl's isolation was no simple tale, and she was determined to unravel it, thread by delicate thread. Even as sleep eluded her, Clara knew her story, and perhaps her fate had only just begun. Thunder grumbled across the moorland, but in the close warmth of the Ashcombe village inn, laughter and music danced above the storm. Clara Marchant sat at a corner table, her notebook tucked discreetly beneath her shawl, while her eyes roamed the assembled company. In the flickering candlelight, faces glowed with the flush of ale and gossip. She leaned nearer to Mrs. Potts, the baker's wife, who was eagerly recounting a tale for the benefit of her audience. Mark my words, the Sinclairs were never the same after Master Henry died. There was a time when Ashcombe Hall hosted grand dinners, and the Earl would ride through the village with a kind word for all. Clara sipped her tea, voice gentle but probing. You speak of the younger brother. Mrs. Potts nodded, lowering her voice. Tragic, it was. Some say the Earl Julian was too harsh with him, always at odds. Others say there was financial mischief, debts run up in London. Now the hall is near ruined, and the Earl hides from the world. They say he blames himself. Across the table, old Mr. Dalloway, the retired schoolmaster, interjected. Blame or guilt, who can say? The gentry live by their secrets, but I've heard it whispered there was a quarrel the very night young Henry died. Some think it drove him to his end. A hush fell, broken by the clatter of a serving tray. Clara kept her expression composed, though her mind raced. But surely such rumors cannot be trusted, she said lightly. The Earl is a private man, that is all. Mrs. Potts gave her a shrewd look. If you want to know the truth, Miss Marchant, best keep your questions to yourself. The Sinclairs have long memories. Clara offered a placating smile, but inside she burned with questions. When she excused herself and stepped out beneath the inn's dripping eaves, the rain had grown fierce, drumming against cobblestones in silver sheets. Within Ashcombe Hall, Julian Sinclair stood alone in his vast library, the storm's voice muffled by heavy curtains. He stared unseeing at a ledger, the columns of numbers blurring into meaninglessness. Shadows bunched in the corners, heavy with memories. Henry's laughter, bright and reckless, echoed in the silence. He pressed his fists to the desk, the scent of old vellum and dying fire filling his lungs. Each week brought fresh creditors, more reminders of the estate's slow decline. The villagers' whispers reached even these stone walls. He had failed them all, brother, tenants, family name. Yet, even as regret gnawed at him, Julian's thoughts circled back to Clara Marchant. He had seen her at the market, her auburn hair uncovered in the wind, her questions bright and persistent. She was everywhere at the church, the grocer, the smithy, her laughter and curiosity, stirring the village from its habitual hush. Her presence was an irritant and a strange, unwelcome comfort. 3 days later, the storm returned with renewed fury. Clara, determined to sketch the view of Ashcombe Hall from the far meadow, found herself caught unprepared as the heavens opened. Her skirts clung to her legs and mud splashed up her boots as she hurried along the narrow path that skirted the estate's boundary. Wind whipped her bonnet askew and lashed her cheeks with rain. A flash of lightning illuminated the hall's looming silhouette. Clara hesitated, weighing pride against prudence, then bolted for the gate. By the time she reached the portico, she was soaked to the skin and shivering. She raised the heavy knocker, its clang echoing through the storm. Moments later, the door swung wide. Julian Sinclair stood in the glow of the hall's candlelight, his expression thunderous. "Miss Marchant," he said, voice rough, "you court pneumonia as boldly as you court scandal." She tried for a rueful smile, rain streaming down her face. "I assure you, my lord, I do not make a habit of trespassing in storms." He stepped aside with a reluctant sigh. "You cannot return to the village in this weather. Come in." Inside, the heat of the fire in the drawing room nearly overwhelmed her. Clara hovered near the hearth, steam rising from her sodden sleeves, as a maid fetched towels and Mrs. Hodge brought a pot of tea. Julian lingered at the far end of the room, every line of his posture betraying discomfort. Clara glanced at him over her teacup. "You must think me a nuisance." He hesitated. "You are persistent." She laughed, the sound bright against the hush. "Writers must be. I find the world full of puzzles. Some puzzles are best left unsolved." His gaze lingered on the flames. Clara studied him, her tone gentling. "You carry burdens, my lord." "Everyone in the village speaks of them." His head snapped up, eyes dark with warning. "What do they say?" She met his look without flinching. "That you are haunted by your brother's death, that the estate is failing, that you are a recluse by choice or by guilt." A muscle worked in his jaw. "They know nothing." "No," she agreed softly. "They do not. But I would like to." Julian moved to the window, watching the rain stream down the glass. For a moment, the only sound was the hiss of the storm and the crackle of burning logs. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. Henry was reckless, charming. He believed the world owed him happiness. I could not protect him from himself. Clara's words were gentle. "You cannot take responsibility for another's soul." He looked at her, something fragile in his expression. "Tell that to a brother." They stood in silence, the space between them charged with unspoken grief and understanding. Then Clara, ever bold, changed the subject. "If you are determined to be a hermit, you ought at least to have a companion for chess." Julian's lips twitched. "Do you play?" "I defeat my mother regularly, which is no mean feat." To his surprise, he found himself smiling. "Very well, Miss Marchant. The board is in the library." The game unfolded in the flickering lamplight, their banter as sharp as the moves. Each exchanged jest revealed a little more about books, about childhood, about the loneliness that shadowed them both. "Do you never tire of solitude?" Clara asked, moving her knight with deliberate care. He considered. "Solitude is safer than disappointment." "But not nearly so interesting," she countered, eyes shining. Julian hesitated, then admitted, "You unsettle me, Miss Marchant. I'm unused to being challenged in my own home." She leaned forward, voice soft. "Then perhaps it is time for change." Outside, the rain battered the world, but within the walls of Ashcombe Hall, something fragile and warm began to take root. A promise, or perhaps only the hope of one. When the storm abated, Clara prepared to leave, her heart oddly light. At the door, Julian paused, uncertain. "You should not walk alone at night. I will have someone see you safely back to the inn." She smiled, lingering a moment longer. "Thank you, my lord, for the shelter and the company." As she disappeared into the gentle hush after rain, Julian remained in the doorway, watching her go. The house seemed less empty, its shadows less oppressive. Neither could name what had changed, but both felt the first tremors of something neither storm nor rumor could dispel. And in the days that followed, Ashcombe's secrets would prove more dangerous and more alluring than either dared imagine. The next morning broke clear and cold, the moor shimmering with dew as Clara made her way once more to Ashcombe Hall. The rain-washed air seemed to carry a sense of possibility, but Clara's heart fluttered with uncertainty. The stormy night had left her unsettled, Julian Sinclair's haunted gaze haunting her thoughts long after she returned to her modest inn. She had spent the dark hours composing a letter of apology and proposal, its words chosen with care, a truce, a bargain. If the Earl would grant her access to his legendary library under his watchful eye, she would refrain from probing further into his personal life or the shadows of the Sinclair name. She presented herself at the door, letter in hand, determined but nervous. Mrs. Hodge received her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, her eyes flicking from Clara's anxious face to the sealed missive. "I shall see that Lord Winthrop receives your note, Miss Marchant," the housekeeper said. "You may wait in the east parlor." Clara paced beneath the faded tapestries, her mind spinning with imagined refusals and the memory of last night's hesitant warmth. After what seemed an age, the door opened and Julian entered, his expression unreadable. He held her letter, his thumb resting on the unbroken seal. "You could have simply asked, Miss Marchant." "I feared the answer would be no," Clara admitted, voice steady. "But I propose a compromise. I will not pry further into your family's affairs, provided you allow me to work in your library, supervised, of course, at whatever hours you deem proper." Julian studied her for a long moment, weighing her sincerity. "You are a determined woman." "Only when it comes to literature," she replied, lips curving with a hint of mischief. The ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "Very well. On the understanding that the library is for your research only, and that you do not speak of its contents or what you may learn here, outside these walls." Clara inclined her head. "You have my word, my lord." He nodded. "Then let us begin. This morning, if you wish." So began their uneasy alliance. Each day, Clara walked the winding lane to Ashcombe Hall, notebook in hand, and took her place at the great library table beneath the painted ceiling. Julian would join her, sometimes bringing correspondence or estate ledgers, sometimes simply reading in a high-backed chair by the fire, always keeping a silent vigil. At first, their conversation was spare, limited to discussions of catalogues and the quirks of the Sinclair collection. But, as the days passed, the stillness between them softened. Julian found himself drawn to Clara's quick wit and keen intelligence. She debated him on the merits of Byron versus Wordsworth, challenged his opinions on the Reform Bill, and dared to suggest that Mary Wollstonecraft had a more lasting influence than half the male philosophers on his shelves. One afternoon, as rain streaked the tall windows, Clara held up a battered copy of Frankenstein. "Do you believe, my lord, that all monsters are created by circumstance?" Julian looked up from his ledger. "Some are born, I think. Others are made by those who claim to love them." Clara's eyes softened. "Perhaps, but I think even monsters crave understanding." He met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them, and turned back to his papers, the silence now companionable. It was on a golden Saturday, when the air was scented with the first promise of spring, that Clara first met Julian's niece. She was in the library, sorting through a stack of travel journals, when the door burst open and a whirlwind of russet curls and freckles bounded in. "Uncle Julian!" Sophie cried, clutching a battered sketchbook. "Look, I finished the drawing of the stables." Julian, so often reserved, transformed at the sight of the girl. He knelt, accepting the book with gentle pride. "Very fine, Sophie. I see you have even remembered old Hobbs' crooked ear." Sophie grinned, then noticed Clara. Her gaze was curious but shy. Julian rose, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "Sophie, this is Miss Marchant. She is a writer, and she's visiting Ashcombe to study our books." Clara knelt to the child's level. "It is lovely to meet you, Sophie. Your drawing is wonderful. May I see?" Sophie hesitated, then nodded, emboldened by Clara's easy manner. "Do you like to draw too?" "I'm hopeless at it," Clara admitted. "But I do love stories. Perhaps you could show me how you sketch such fine horses." Sophie's smile blossomed, and soon the two were hunched over the library table, pencil scratching, laughter mingling with the rustle of pages. Julian watched them, his heart tightening at the sight of his niece, so often wary, so often the subject of village gossip, laughing without reserve. Later, as Sophie skipped away to present her sketch to Mrs. Hodge, Clara turned to Julian. "She is a remarkable girl." "She has had much to bear," Julian said quietly. "The whispers in the village." They do not spare children. Clara's voice was gentle. She is lucky to have you. A shadow crossed his features. I only hope I am enough. The weeks passed. Clara and Julian fell into an unexpected rhythm, their library debates growing ever more animated. They sparred over the legacy of Cromwell, the virtues of the Gothic novel, the necessity or not of marriage for women of intellect. Clara, who had so long felt stifled by her mother's expectations, found herself thriving in the challenge of Julian's company. One evening, as dusk bled across the moors, Clara lingered at the window while Julian shelved a volume of poetry. The air between them was charged with something new, something both thrilling and terrifying. "May I ask, my lord," Clara said, "do you fear scandal so much that you would deny yourself any comfort?" He stilled, his back to her. "It is not myself I fear for, but Sophie, and—" He hesitated, searching for the words. "I have brought enough pain on this household. I cannot allow more." Clara's heart twisted. Sometimes, shielding others only leaves us both alone. He turned, his face unguarded. "You speak as if you know loneliness." "I do," she said simply. "But I have learned that loneliness is not always safer than risk." He considered her, the silence between them deepening. "You are unlike anyone I have known, Miss Marchant." She smiled, a touch rueful. "I have been told that before, usually as a warning." He surprised her with a soft laugh. "In my case, it is not a warning. It is a temptation." Her cheeks warmed, and she looked away, uncertain, exhilarated, afraid. Perhaps we are both tempted by things we should not want. As spring deepened, so too did the villagers' curiosity. Clara could not walk to the hall without encountering whispers or sidelong glances. At the market, Mrs. Potts remarked, "You are becoming quite the fixture at Ashcombe, Miss Marchant. Some would say you are writing more than history." Clara answered with practiced good humor, but the words stung. She knew what rumor could do. She had witnessed it in London and seen its cruelty here. Worse, she saw how Sophie shrank at the sight of gossiping tongues, and how Julian's jaw set with each fresh slight. One afternoon, as Sophie ran ahead to the orchard, Clara found Julian on the terrace, gaze distant. "The villagers will always talk," she said softly. He did not look at her. "They have reason." "No," Clara replied, voice fierce. "They have excuses. You are a good man, Julian." He turned to her, eyes dark with longing and doubt. "You cannot know that. I know it because I see how you protect her, how you care for this place, how you have let me in, when you had every right to turn me away." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the fine lines at his eyes, the vulnerability in his stance. "And what do you see, Miss Marchant, when you look at yourself?" She faltered, her own fears rising. "Ambition, restlessness, a longing for more than I am allowed." He reached out, then stopped himself, fingers curling at his side. "You deserve more, and yet, I fear I have little to offer." She looked at him, her heart aching with the truth of her feelings. Perhaps, together, we could find what we both lack. The tension between them was palpable, a yearning neither dared name. Clara stepped back, breaking the spell, her pulse racing. "Forgive me. I have said too much." He shook his head, voice rough. "No. You have said only what I have longed to hear." A moment later, Sophie's laughter rang out from the garden, and the fragile intimacy was lost. Julian turned away, his shoulders taut, while Clara fought to steady her breath. That night, Clara wrote by candlelight, her emotions tumbling across the page. She was torn. Her duty as a writer, her hunger for truth, and the undeniable pull she felt toward the Earl. She could not abandon her ambition, but neither could she ignore the warmth that had grown between them, unexpected, dangerous, and precious. In the shadows of Ashcombe Hall, Julian sat alone in the library, Sophie's laughter and Clara's smile echoing in his memory. For the first time in years, he let himself hope that the future might hold more than sorrow and regret. But hope was a fragile thing, and the secrets that lingered in Ashcombe's halls had yet to reveal their sharpest edges. Neither Clara nor Julian could know how swiftly the peace they had forged would be threatened. or how love, once awakened, could prove both their salvation and their undoing. Word of Lord Fairfax's impending arrival swept through Ashcombe like a chill wind. The villagers spoke his name in hushed tones, recalling his calculating gaze and the way he once circled the edges of every family misfortune, waiting for opportunity. When his carriage rolled up the drive, glossy and ostentatious, Clara sensed the tremor that ran through the hall. Julian's features grew drawn, his every movement taut with dread, as servants hurried to prepare a guest room that none truly wished to occupy. Lord Fairfax was all smooth courtesy and veiled threat, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Cousin Julian," he drawled, surveying the library with a proprietary air. "How pleasant to see Ashcombe still standing, for now." Julian met him with cold civility. "The hall has withstood far worse than a little scandal, Fairfax." Fairfax's gaze flicked to the books, the ledgers, the worn carpet at the hearth. "So the gossips say. But London is abuzz with concern for your fitness. The estate cannot run itself, and little Sophie, poor thing, requires stability. The family will not tolerate another tragedy." His meaning was clear. Should Julian falter, Fairfax would not hesitate to lay claim to everything. In the village, Clara found herself the subject of mounting scrutiny. Whispers followed her to the grocer and the green. The innkeeper's smile had grown guarded. The storm broke in earnest when her mother arrived, sweeping into the parlor with a flurry of silk and indignation. "Clara, how could you be so reckless?" Lady Marchant's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "Do you not realize what you risk, your reputation, your future? London is full of talk, and now this Lord Fairfax arrives." "It is not too late to return home, make amends. Accept Lord Everley's offer." Clara bristled, her words tight with restraint. "I am not a child, Mamma. I have work here." Lady Marchant's eyes narrowed. "Work, or an infatuation with a ruined man and a crumbling manor? You will come to your senses, Clara. I insist." She fled the inn, heart pounding, only to find her publisher waiting outside with a look of impatience and calculation. "Miss Marchant," Mr. Harrow said, voice low, "the time for subtlety is past. London demands a story something sensational, or I will have to reveal your true purpose in Ashcombe myself. You would not want your mother or the Earl to learn you came not for history, but for scandal." Clara's hands balled into fists. "You would not dare." "Oh, but I would. Think carefully before you disappoint me." Ashcombe Hall, meanwhile, simmered with a new, brittle tension. Fairfax prowled the corridors, making pointed inquiries about the accounts and Sophie's education. Sophie herself shrank from his gaze, retreating to the gardens or clinging to Clara's side during their lessons. Julian, ever vigilant, watched every encounter with growing dread. Clara found him in the library late one evening, staring unseeing at a letter from London. He looked older, shoulders bowed beneath the weight of his fears. "My lord," Clara said softly, "do not let Fairfax unsettle you. Sophie knows who loves her." He forced a smile. "Love may not be enough. If the family deems me unfit, Sophie will be taken from me. Ashcombe will fall to a man who cares nothing for its soul." Clara's own troubles pressed on her chest, but she reached for him, her fingers brushing his sleeve. "There must be a way. You are a better guardian than any of them." Julian's eyes clouded with pain. "Not if I bring further scandal. You must see it, Clara." The tongues wagging, the eyes watching. "You are already suffering for your association with me. I will not have you destroyed for my sake." She recoiled as if struck. "Do you mean to send me away?" "It is safer," he whispered, his voice breaking. "For you, for Sophie, for the hall. I cannot give the world more ammunition." Clara's throat tightened, tears threatening. "Safety is a poor substitute for happiness, Julian." He turned away, unable to meet her gaze. "There are things I cannot risk." Clara left him then, her heart heavy, the library's warmth now a prison of memory. The days that followed blurred with misery. Her mother's warnings echoed in her mind, her publisher's threat a noose tightening with every letter. Yet it was Julian's withdrawal that wounded most deeply, his absence at their usual meetings, the stilted distance in his rare replies, the way Sophie's eyes searched hers for reassurance. Unable to bear it, Clara sought Julian in the rose garden as dusk fell, her skirts brushing petals wet with dew. She found him pacing, his face drawn, his hands clenched. "Julian," she said, voice trembling, "I cannot do this. I cannot choose between my work and my heart." He looked at her, anguish plain. "You are in danger, Clara. If your motives are exposed, if you are ruined." "My publisher knows why I came," she interrupted. "He threatens to reveal it if I do not provide the story he wants. My mother, she demands I leave. I am pulled in every direction, and none of them lead to peace." Julian's anger flared, not at her, but at the injustice. "You should not have to pay for my mistakes." She shook her head, tears glinting in the failing light. "They are not your mistakes, Julian. They are the world's, its hunger for gossip, its cruelty. But I cannot betray you, or Sophie, or myself." He moved to her, hands trembling as he reached for her shoulders. "What will you do?" Clara closed her eyes, drawing strength from his touch. "I do not know. But I will not let anyone dictate my story. Not my mother, not my publisher, not Lord Fairfax. And I will not let fear decide my fate." A silence fell, heavy with all that remained unsaid. The path before them was shadowed, but in that moment, neither Clara nor Julian turned away. For as the eyes of society closed in, secrets threatened to tear them apart, and only their courage could determine whether love or scandal would win the day. The wind rattled the windows of Ashcombe Hall, and the sky hung low and grey over the sodden fields. In the library's golden gloom, Julian Sinclair stood with his back to the fire, gaze fixed on the storm beyond. The air was thick with the tension of secrets unspoken, of choices that could no longer be deferred. Clara entered quietly, closing the door against the murmurs of servants and the ever-watchful eyes of Lord Fairfax. She paused a moment, uncertain, her hands twisting in her skirts. Julian did not turn, but his voice, when it came, was low and raw. "You wish to speak, Miss Marchant?" Clara stepped forward. The weeks of uncertainty, of half-truths and bruised pride, had worn her thin. "Julian," she said softly, "please do not send me away. Not while there is still truth left between us." He finally turned, and she saw how pale he had become, the shadows under his eyes deep as wounds. "You do not know what you ask." "Then tell me," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Let me bear it with you." For a moment, he hesitated. Then something in him seemed to break, and he gestured to the hearth. "Sit," he said. "You deserve the truth no one else would hear." They sat opposite each other, the fire crackling in the hush. Julian's hands were clenched in his lap. "My brother Henry was reckless," he began, voice flat with old pain. "He loved the world, and the world loved him for it. He gambled, drank, lived beyond his means. I tried to shield him, but he refused to listen. That night, we quarreled. I threatened to cut off his allowance if he did not reform. He laughed at me, said I was a cold tyrant." Julian's mouth twisted. He stormed out. Hours later, they found him dead. A riding accident, the coroner said. But the rumors began at once. Clara listened, her heart in her throat. The family Fairfax, the solicitor, even my own mother insisted I take the blame. Better a stern brother than a ruined one, they said. They feared scandal more than grief. I did as they asked. I have borne it ever since. Julian's voice broke. Every day I wonder if I could have saved him if I had been kinder, or stronger, or less proud. And now they use my guilt as a weapon. Fairfax wants the estate. The family would rather see me alone than risk another stain on their name. Clara reached across the small table, laying her hand over his. "You did not kill your brother, Julian. You loved him. They asked too much of you." He met her eyes, his own bleak with longing. "Why do you stay, Clara, when all the world would have you flee?" She drew a shaky breath. "Because I know what it is to be judged, to be told what I can and cannot be. My whole life, I have fought for a voice against my mother, against society, even against myself. I came to Ashcombe for a story, but I found something more, a truth that is worth the pain." Their hands remained entwined, the storm outside echoing the turmoil within. For the first time, Julian's shoulders eased. the burden lightened by her understanding. Their fragile peace, however, was not to last. Lord Fairfax, ever vigilant, watched the growing closeness between Clara and Julian with narrowed eyes. He moved through the hall like a shadow, sowing doubt, dropping sly hints in the ears of servants and villagers alike. One afternoon, as Clara walked the rose garden in quiet contemplation, Fairfax appeared by her side. "Miss Marchant," he said smoothly, "you must forgive me for intruding, but I cannot help but notice how much time you spend with my cousin. Such devotion in a woman of your station is admirable." Clara stiffened, refusing to be baited. "I'm here for my work, Lord Fairfax. Nothing more." He smiled, a cold baring of teeth. "Of course, but the world is rarely so innocent. I would be careful, were I you. Ashcombe has a way of devouring those who love it unwisely." With that, he drifted away, leaving Clara to the uneasy sensation that she had been marked. That evening, a note arrived at her door, ostensibly from Julian, asking her to meet him in the West Wing at dusk. The corridors were empty, shadows lengthening across marble and oak. Clara waited by a window, confusion gnawing at her. When footsteps echoed behind her, she turned, only to find Fairfax, not Julian. He stepped too close, his voice oily. "You are clever, Miss Marchant, but not clever enough. If you care for your own reputation, or my cousin's, you will leave before you are truly ruined." Before she could move, a door banged open, and two housemaids entered, eyes wide. Fairfax stepped back, feigning concern. "Forgive me, ladies, I found Miss Marchant lost. I was only offering to escort her to the drawing-room." The scene played out before an audience all too eager for scandal. Clara's cheeks burned with humiliation and dread. By morning, the village was alive with gossip. The story grew with every telling. Clara and Lord Fairfax discovered alone. Clara found wandering the hall in the evening. The Earl's guest, it was whispered, had overstepped all bounds of propriety. Shopkeepers grew cold. The innkeeper offered only clipped answers. And even Sophie's nurse looked at Clara with suspicion. Julian heard the tale from his solicitor, Mr. Ashcroft, who arrived with a face like thunder. "This cannot be ignored, my lord. Your guest's conduct has become a liability. Already there is talk of petitions to the family trustees. If you do not act, Fairfax will press his claim, and Sophie's future, your own will, be jeopardized." Julian's fists clenched. "You know Clara is innocent. This was a trap, set by Fairfax." Ashcroft's expression softened, but his voice remained firm. "Intentions matter little to those who wish you ill. You must send her away, now, before worse comes." That evening, Clara sat alone at the inn, her world shrinking with every hour. Letters from her publisher went unanswered. Her mother had retreated to London, mortified by her daughter's disgrace. Sophie's notes, once so lively, ceased altogether. The villagers she had come to know now crossed the street to avoid her. A knock at her door startled her from her misery. Julian stood there, pale and tense, rain glistening on his coat. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. She nodded, unable to speak. He closed the door behind him, standing awkwardly in the small room. For a long moment, neither spoke. "They want you gone," he said at last, voice ragged. "Ashcroft, the family, even the village. They believe you have brought shame to Ashcombe." Clara met his gaze, pain and defiance warring in her eyes. "Will you send me away, Julian?" He moved to her, taking her hands in his. "I do not want to, but I cannot see you suffer for my sake. I cannot bear to be the cause of your ruin." Her voice was fierce. "You are not. This is Fairfax's doing. I will not let him win." Tears slipped down her cheeks, and Julian brushed them away with trembling fingers. "If you stay, you may lose everything, your reputation, your future. And if I leave," she whispered, "I lose you." Julian's arms went around her, drawing her close, as if by sheer force he could shield her from the world's malice. "I'm so sorry, Clara. I should have protected you. I should have seen Fairfax for what he is." She shook her head, pressing her face to his chest. "You cannot protect me from the world, Julian. But you have given me what I needed most, truth and love." He held her as the storm battered the windows, both knowing that dawn would bring decisions neither wished to face. Outside, the night deepened, thick with the promise of further trials. But within that small room, Clara and Julian clung to hope, even as the world threatened to tear them apart. And as the first rays of morning slipped over the hills, fate itself waited, poised to reveal whether love could outlast the shadows cast by guilt and ambition. The morning after scandal broke in Ashcombe, Clara awoke to the sharp, cold edge of dread pressing at her chest. She had slept little, her mind haunted by Julian's embrace and the certainty that the world had shifted beneath her feet. As she dressed, she heard the inn staff whispering in the corridor, her name spoken in tones of pity and censure. She barely had time to gather her thoughts before her mother swept into the room, her face pale with outrage, her gloved hands trembling as she closed the door with a snap. Lady Marchant's voice was brittle as ice. "Pack your things, Clara. We are leaving for London at once. I will not have my daughter further humiliated in this God-forsaken place." Clara steadied herself against the dressing table, meeting her mother's gaze with a quiet, iron resolve. "No, Mama, I'm not leaving." Lady Marchant's eyes widened, her tone rising to a shrill pitch. "You defy me? After all I have done for you? After the disgrace you have brought upon our family?" "I have brought no disgrace," Clara replied, her voice trembling but clear. "I have done nothing to be ashamed of. You have defied society, thrown away your prospects, and consorted with a man whose reputation is already in ruins. If you do not return to London with me, you will be disowned. Do you understand?" Clara's heart ached, but she straightened her shoulders. "I would rather be disowned than betray my own conscience, Mama. I'm staying. For Sophie, for Julian, and for myself." Lady Marchant stared at her daughter for a long, furious moment, then spun on her heel and left, slamming the door behind her. Clara sank onto the bed, tears prickling her eyes, but she felt the strange exhilaration of freedom, even as fear nipped at its heels. At Ashcombe Hall, Julian's world teetered on a knife's edge. The servants moved about with drawn faces, and Lord Fairfax's presence infected every corner with suspicion and malice. Julian found Fairfax in the billiard room, cue in hand, a smug smile curving his lips. "Cousin Julian," Fairfax drawled, "I must congratulate you. The village has never been so lively. You and Miss Marchant have provided a most diverting scandal." Julian's temper snapped. He strode across the room, his voice low and dangerous. "You engineered this, Fairfax. You set the trap. You poisoned the minds of everyone from the kitchen to the village green. You have tormented my family for the last time." Fairfax set down his cue, his smile turning sharp. "You are hardly in a position to threaten me. Your estate is on the brink of collapse, your ward is the subject of gossip, and your own reputation is irreparably stained. I'm only doing what is best for Ashcombe." Julian's fists clenched at his sides. "If you ever speak of Clara Marchant again, if you so much as look at Sophie, you will answer to me." A tense silence stretched between them. Fairfax's eyes glinted with calculation. "Such passion, Julian. But passion is no substitute for sense. The world will not forgive you for loving a woman so unsuitable." Julian's voice was steel. "Get out of my house." For a moment, it seemed violence might erupt, but Fairfax only inclined his head, cold amusement flickering in his gaze. "As you wish. But know this, you cannot fight the world and win." As the day wore on, trouble deepened. Sophie, who had heard the whispers and sensed the tension, grew pale and listless. By evening, a fever gripped her. Mrs. Hodge wrung her hands while the physician shook his head and muttered about the dangers of worry and exposure. Clara, learning of Sophie's illness, hurried to the hall despite the stares and murmurs that followed her from the village. She found the child tossing and sweating, her eyes glassy with fever. Without hesitation, Clara took her place at Sophie's bedside, bathing her brow, coaxing her to sip water, and reading softly from favorite stories when the night grew long. Julian watched from the doorway, agony written across his face. He saw the gentle way Clara soothed Sophie's fears, the kindness in her touch, the resolve in her voice. Hodge, once wary, now offered her silent gratitude, and even the maids who had once gossiped brought fresh linens and broth without prompting. "She trusts you," Julian murmured, voice husky with fatigue and hope. Clara met his gaze, her own filled with exhaustion and a fierce, protective love. She needs you, Julian. Both of you need each other. For 2 days and nights, Clara scarcely slept, refusing to leave Sophie's side. The fever finally broke as dawn gilded the hills, and Sophie's thin arms reached for Clara, whispering, "Don't go." Clara pressed a kiss to her brow. "I will not leave you, dearest, not ever." The staff, seeing Clara's devotion, rallied behind her. The whispers in the hall began to shift from suspicion to respect, and then, slowly, to loyalty. Yet the outside world was not so easily swayed. The villagers' tongues wagged with renewed vigor as creditors circled Ashcombe, demanding payment and threatening foreclosure. Shops that once welcomed Julian's custom now hesitated. The vicar's sermons grew pointed, and the ladies of the parish exchanged knowing glances. In the midst of this turmoil, Julian found himself unable to hide his feelings any longer. He sought Clara in the garden one stormy afternoon, the air thick with the scent of lilacs and rain. She turned as he approached, her cheeks flushed, her eyes shadowed by fatigue and longing. "Clara," he said, his voice trembling with the force of all he had held back. I will not pretend any longer. I love you. I have loved you since the moment you first argued with me about Milton in the library. I tried to shield you from scandal, from pain, but I have only made things worse." She reached for his hand, her own trembling. "Julian, I love you too. I have fought it, denied it, tried to put duty and ambition before my heart. But I cannot. I will not." He drew her close, his arms trembling as they closed around her. "If we choose each other, we may lose everything. The estate, Sophie, even the little respect the world still gives us." Clara pressed her forehead to his. "We have already lost so much, Julian. I would rather have you, and face the world's contempt, than live a life of safe misery." Their lips met, the kiss sweet and desperate, a promise made in the face of ruin. But as they parted, reality pressed in on them. So many obstacles, so much at stake. His creditors would not wait, Fairfax would not relent, and the village's judgment had only sharpened. Julian brushed a tear from Clara's cheek. "How can I ask you to stay, to share this burden? You deserve more than Ashcombe's ghosts." She smiled through her tears. "I want only you. But I am afraid, Julian, afraid that love is not enough." He gathered her hands in his, their future hanging in the balance. "We will fight, Clara, together, whatever comes." The storm broke above them, rain sweeping across the moor, but neither moved. Their confession bound them, fierce and fragile, while the world outside conspired to tear them apart. And as thunder rolled over Ashcombe, fate prepared to test their love in ways neither could yet imagine. Morning sunlight filtered weakly through the stained glass of Ashcombe Hall, painting trembling colors across the parquet floor. Clara stood at the window, the world outside blurred with uncertainty. For days, she and Julian had lived in the eye of a storm gossip, creditors, and the ever-present threat of Lord Fairfax's machinations closing in from all sides. Yet, for one fragile night, love had felt enough. Now uncertainty gnawed at her heart. Julian found her there, his steps hesitant. He looked as if he'd not slept, his eyes burning with resolve and fear. He took her hands in his, the warmth of his touch a silent plea. "Clara," he began, voice rough, "I have nothing left to offer you but my name, my protection, and my heart. Will you marry me? I cannot bear to see you scorned and alone. Let me shelter you, whatever the world may say." Her heart ached at the earnestness in his face, the longing and the sorrow, the desperate hope. She drew away gently, her voice trembling. "Julian, you know I love you. I would face anything for you, but I cannot marry you as a means of rescue. I will not be your ward or your act of contrition. If we are to be together, it must be as equals, free of shame and secrets." He faltered, pain flickering across his features. "But the world. Let the world see you fight for happiness," she said fiercely. "Let them see you claim your innocence, not simply endure their censure. Stand for yourself, for Sophie, for all who depend on you. Only then will I stand beside you as your wife, not as an object of pity, but as your partner." Julian's jaw tightened with the weight of her challenge, but a glimmer of hope kindled in his eyes. Then we will fight. Together. That very evening, they retreated to the library, voices low and urgent as they crafted their plan. The truth, long buried beneath years of rumor and family manipulation, must come to light. Only by exposing Fairfax's schemes and the real story behind Henry Sinclair's death could Julian clear his name and reclaim his honor. Clara's mind raced with possibilities. I will write our story, Julian. Not the lies the world prefers, but the truth of Henry's recklessness, your sacrifice, Fairfax's hunger for power. The villagers read the County Gazette. If I publish there first and send copies to the London papers, the story will reach both the gentry and the people who matter to Ashcombe. Julian hesitated, the cost of such exposure stark before him. They will say I seek to excuse myself, that I use you to curry favor. Clara's gaze was steady. Let them. I will sign my name. I will speak as a witness, not just as your ally, but as a woman who knows the burden of unjust judgment. When your day comes before the magistrate, you will not stand alone. He looked at her then, pride and gratitude warring with fear. You risk everything. She squeezed his hand. So do you. But we are stronger together. The next week unfolded in a blur of tension and resolve. While Julian gathered old letters and documents, proof of his innocence and Fairfax's interference, Clara wrote. Her words were unsparing, and passionate. She described the night of Henry's death, Julian's forced silence, and Fairfax's campaign to seize the estate. She painted a portrait of a family wounded by pride and secrecy, and of a village manipulated by a man with everything to gain from their pain. She brought the finished pages to the village printer herself. The man, a kindly soul who had once doubted her, read the story in silence, then nodded. I will see it done, Miss Marchant. The truth must out. Copies of the account appeared in shop windows and at market stalls. Neighbors read aloud to one another in the evenings. In the town square, an old man spat and declared, about time the truth was told. Fairfax raged at the affront, demanding retractions and threatening lawsuits. But public sentiment shifted, however subtly. The staff at Ashcombe stood taller. Sophie's nurse offered Clara tea and gratitude. Even the vicar, once so cold, allowed that Miss Marchant's courage is most admirable. The decisive moment arrived with Julian's summons before the county magistrate. Clara insisted on attending, her presence a statement of solidarity. The hearing was held in the draughty hall of the village court, the benches packed with curious faces, villagers, creditors, and the gentry alike. Julian stood straight and unflinching as the magistrate called for an accounting of the events surrounding Henry Sinclair's death and the rumors that had plagued the family ever since. Fairfax, resplendent and sneering, gave his version, painting Julian as a cold, vengeful brother, unfit for stewardship of the estate. Julian countered with calm clarity. He admitted his quarrel with Henry, his grief, and the family's decision to shield the Sinclairs from further shame. He presented letters from Henry, pleading for money and forgiveness, and a final note that revealed Henry's state of mind. He did not spare himself, but he refused to bear the blame for another man's tragedy. Clara rose and read her published account aloud. Her words silenced the room. She spoke of the corrosive power of gossip, the injustice of scapegoating, and the strength it took for Julian to choose honor over silence. She named Fairfax as the architect of deceit, laying bare his schemes with unwavering resolve. The magistrate conferred with his associates. At length, he pronounced, "There is no evidence to sustain the accusations against Lord Winthrop. The late Mr. Sinclair's death was a tragic accident. This court recognizes Lord Winthrop's right to his title, property, and guardianship of Miss Sophie Sinclair." Relief swept the hall. Yet the air was not entirely clear. Some villagers would not be easily swayed, and the taint of scandal, though weakened, still lingered at the edges of every conversation. Back at Ashcombe, Clara and Julian stood in the quiet of the rose garden. The evening breeze was heavy with the scent of blooms and possibility. Julian took Clara's hands, his voice low but fierce. You were my courage, Clara. Without you, I would never have faced them all. Can you stand by me now, not because you must, but because you choose it? She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. I choose you, Julian. Not for protection or pity or pride, but for love. For all we have endured, and all we might yet become. He kissed her then, the world falling away for a moment. Yet even in their embrace, they knew that wounds did not heal overnight. The villagers watched, the creditors circled still, and some stains, once made, could never be fully erased. But hand in hand, with truth and hope as their armor, Clara and Julian faced the uncertain dawn together, at last, but not yet truly free. And as the shadows lengthened over Ashcombe, fate waited, one last trial poised on the horizon, to test the love that had already survived so much. The news of Clara Marchant's alliance with the Earl of Winthrop struck society like a thunderclap. In London drawing rooms and Devonshire parlours alike, tongues wagged with shock and delight in equal measure. The scandal of Ashcombe, which had once seemed a private, ruinous affair, became the subject of lively debate. From the embittered dowagers of Mayfair to the sharp-tongued widows who ruled the village green. Ashcombe Hall itself felt the tremor. Letters arrived by the dozen, some scrawled in outrage, others with cautious congratulations. The village vicar, emboldened by the court's decision, called upon Julian with a thinly veiled sermon about repentance and the restoration of virtue. The estate's creditors hovered, not quite mollified, but the tide was turning. There was a sense of possibility, a quickening beneath the soil. Clara bore the attention with dignity, refusing to be cowed by the judgment of strangers. She walked the lanes of Ashcombe with her head high, Sophie's small hand in hers, and answered every question with a calm, clear voice. To those who muttered about the impropriety of her presence, she replied, I am here by my own choice, and by the grace of those who know me best. It was Sophie, above all, who refused to let the world's malice touch her. The child clung to Clara with the fierce loyalty of the lonely, refusing to be separated from her side. When the gossips tried to frighten her, Sophie lifted her chin and declared, Miss Marchant is my dearest friend, and Uncle Julian says we are to have a new family soon. That is all I care about. The staff, too, rallied to Clara's defense. Mrs. Hodge, who had once watched her with wary suspicion, now bustled about the hall with a proprietary pride, ensuring no visitor left without a cup of strong tea and a word in Clara's favor. The housemaids whispered that Ashcombe had not felt so alive in years, and the footman, John, began reciting lines of poetry as he polished the banisters, emboldened by the new spirit in the house. It was in the village, though, that the deepest change was felt. Old Mr. Dalloway, the retired schoolmaster, visited the hall to present Clara with a battered volume of Shakespeare. For the lady who brought the truth to light, he said, bowing low. A few days later, Mrs. Potts sent over a basket of warm rolls, accompanied by a note. Ashcombe is your home now, Miss Marchant. Do not let the fools drive you away. Yet for every gesture of acceptance there was a cold shoulder or averted gaze. The wounds of scandal did not heal overnight. Some villagers refused to speak to Julian, and others eyed Clara with the same suspicion they had reserved for Fairfax. But the balance had shifted, and hope, once a stranger at Ashcombe, was beginning to find its place. Lady Marchant's carriage arrived in a swirl of dust and indignation. She swept into the hall, her bearing as regal as ever, but the lines at her eyes deeper, her mouth pinched with worry. Clara met her mother in the morning room, bracing herself for another battle. Instead, Lady Marchant paused in the doorway, her gaze drawn to the laughter drifting in from the garden, where Sophie and Julian played at battledore. She studied her daughter for a long, silent moment. You are changed, Clara, she said at last. I do not pretend to understand it, but I see you are happy here, happier than I have ever seen you. Clara's voice was soft but resolute. I have found my place, Mama, not because of Julian, but because I chose it. Lady Marchant hesitated. The world will never forget what has happened. I do not ask them to, Clara replied. Only that they let me live honestly. A sigh escaped Lady Marchant, as if the weight of years pressed her down. Then I will not stand in your way. If the Earl is your choice, he shall have my blessing. Relief and gratitude flooded Clara's heart. She embraced her mother, knowing the gesture was as much reconciliation as it was farewell to the life she had once been expected to lead. The next surprise arrived by post, a thick cream-colored envelope bearing the seal of Mr. Harrow, Clara's publisher. He had watched the unfolding drama with a mixture of anxiety and professional delight, but now he wrote with new respect. Miss Marchant, your courage and candor have won you a legion of readers. If you will, I would be honored to publish your next work on your terms. The world is hungry for stories of truth and redemption. Yours is one I trust completely. Clara grinned as she read the letter aloud to Julian in the library. He pulled her close, pride shining in his eyes. You have made your own way, Clara. Ashcombe is lucky to have you. She laughed, lightness returning to her voice. We are lucky to have each other. With the first hints of spring, Julian announced an audacious scheme. The library shall be open to all who wish to read, he declared at dinner, stunning the staff and Sophie alike. Ashcombe has been a fortress long enough. Let it become a haven for those who love learning, as my father once dreamed. Clara's heart swelled with admiration. She threw herself into the project, organizing the catalogues, inviting local scholars, and arranging for the village children to visit once a week. The first open day drew a crowd, curious villagers, skeptical gentry, and wide-eyed children alike. Clara watched as Julian welcomed them, dignity restored, his reputation shifting from that of a reclusive scandal to a patron of art and learning. Thank you, he murmured to her as the guests departed, his voice thick with emotion, for believing in what Ashcombe could be. She squeezed his hand. It is you who made it possible, Julian. You faced the world and did not flinch. Now let them come and see for themselves what kind of man you truly are. Still, not all wounds healed at once. There were murmurs among the old guard who refused to set foot in the hall or sent back invitations unopened. The more stubborn villagers clung to their doubts, and creditors continued their cautious dance around the estate's finances. But the library's doors remained open, and with every child who left clutching a borrowed book, the hall's dark history seemed to lift a little more. Clara found herself at the center of this quiet revolution writer, hostess, friend. In the evenings, she and Julian walked the gardens, planning new lectures and charitable works. Sophie skipped ahead, her laughter bright and free. Yet beneath the peace, Clara knew that true respectability was not won in a day. The shadow of scandal lingered, and the world watched, ready to pounce at the first misstep. One twilight, as the sun set over the moors, Julian drew Clara close. We are not yet free of the past, are we? She rested her head on his shoulder, her voice gentle but unyielding. No, but every day we shape our future, and every day we choose each other. He kissed her forehead, the promise of tomorrow shining in his eyes. And as Ashcombe Hall glowed with new life, the question lingered. Could love and courage truly outlast the world's doubts? Or would the past rise again to test all they had built? The answer waited, just beyond the horizon, where hope and history met beneath the wide, uncertain sky. Autumn faded into winter, and the wild moors about Ashcombe Hall softened under a gentle frost. Within the ancient walls, life took on a new and vibrant rhythm. Where once silence and suspicion reigned, now laughter and voices filled the corridors. Months had passed since the storm of scandal and the bitter trials that bound Clara and Julian together, and in that time their partnership had blossomed, rooted in love, tempered by adversity, and quickened by the spark of shared intellect. Clara awoke each morning to the quiet promise of purpose. The library, once a forbidden sanctum, was now her favorite haunt, where she and Julian pored over books, debated ideas, and planned the future of Ashcombe's newfound literary salons. Their evenings were a whirl of lively conversation, guests from London and the neighboring counties, local scholars, poets, and even a few daring villagers who dared to cross the old social boundaries. The long tables glimmered with candlelight and silver, the air alive with spirited argument and laughter. Even those who once doubted the couple's respectability could not resist the allure of Ashcombe's transformation. Julian, for his part, rediscovered the joy of belonging. No longer was he the haunted figure of village rumor. His stewardship of the estate, his generosity in opening the library, and the warmth with which he welcomed all comers gradually won over the community. He moved through the gatherings with renewed confidence, his dark eyes shining as he watched Clara command a room or coax a shy guest into conversation. Sophie, too, flourished. With Clara's steady love and Julian's gentle guidance, she grew from a solemn, wary child into a lively and inquisitive girl. Her laughter echoed through the hall, her sketches adorned the nursery walls, and her questions, endless and unguarded, became a source of delight for all. She was, as Julian told Clara one evening, as they watched Sophie chase a stray cat through the rose garden, the heart of our new beginning. "It is you who gave her that," Clara replied, her hand entwined in his. "You taught her how to hope again." He smiled, brushing a stray curl from her brow. "We did, Clara, together." With the coming of spring, Clara's next novel made its quiet debut in London. Inspired by the ordeal at Ashcombe, the perils of rumor, the courage to speak the truth, and the strength found in unlikely alliances, it was at once a love story and a call to integrity. Her publisher, ever pragmatic, had expected a modest reception. Instead, the book became a sensation. Critics who had once dismissed Clara as a troublesome bluestocking now praised her insight and wit. Letters poured in from readers moved by the tale's honesty and hope. Even the most reluctant members of society found themselves charmed by the heroine's spirit and the hero's redemption. Ashcombe Hall was no longer merely the backdrop for scandal. It became a symbol of transformation. Clara's success did not turn her head. She continued to write, to teach the village children in the library, and to pour her energies into the salons that drew minds and hearts from far and wide. Julian's pride in her was evident to all, his support unwavering, his admiration a constant source of delight. One evening, as the hall prepared for another gathering, Clara stood before the mirror, smoothing the folds of her gown. Julian entered, catching her reflection in the glass. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly, his hand resting at her waist. She smiled, a flush of anticipation in her cheeks. "Only a little. The Earl of Ashcombe's literary salons have become quite the scandal, you know." He grinned, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Let them whisper. Ashcombe has never been so alive." As the guests arrived, Clara and Julian moved among them like the center of a widening circle. Old friends and new allies mingled, the vicar debating poetry with a London editor, Mrs. Hodge presiding over the tea urn with undisputed authority, Sophie showing her sketches to a visiting artist. Even Lady Marchant, once so stern, was seen laughing at a jest from Mr. Dalloway, the retired schoolmaster. Later, as the evening waned and the guests departed, Julian drew Clara into the quiet of the library. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, voice low. "All we risked, all we lost." She shook her head, her gaze steady. "No, the scars remain, but I would not trade them for the life we have built. They remind me of what we endured and what we overcame." He pulled her close, resting his cheek against her hair. "You saved Ashcombe, you saved me." She smiled, her eyes shining. "We saved each other." Time, as it will, softened the memory of past wounds. Society, ever fickle, found new scandals and new heroes, and the story of Ashcombe became less cautionary tale and more legend. The villagers who once turned away now sent invitations, and creditors, persuaded by Julian's reforms and Clara's growing fortune, became partners in rebuilding the estate. Clara's books continued to find eager readers. Her name became synonymous with courage and candor, and young women wrote to her from across the country, asking for advice, encouragement, and sometimes for hope. She answered every letter, never forgetting the loneliness that had once shadowed her own heart. Julian, restored in the eyes of his peers, was sought after for counsel and support. He never let the respectability he had regained dull his sense of justice. The library remained open to all, a testament to what could be accomplished when fear gave way to faith. And Sophie, beloved by all, grew up in the light of their example, her future secure. Her laughter proved that happiness, hard won, was happiness most cherished. As the seasons turned, Clara and Julian often walked the moors at dusk, hand in hand, the air rich with the scent of heather and hope. They spoke of the past, of the life they had built, and of the future that stretched before them, uncertain, yes, but full of promise. One evening, as the last light faded, Clara paused and looked out over the rolling fields. "Do you think they will remember us, Julian? Not for the scandal, but for what we tried to do." He smiled, drawing her close. "They will remember the love that changed Ashcombe. And so will I, for all my days." She laughed, her heart at peace. "Then let us write the rest together." And so, beneath the vast and changing sky, Clara and Julian's love became the heart of a new legacy, a story born of courage, redeemed by truth, and cherished by all who called Ashcombe Hall their home.